This is a true story told on an urban exploration forum in 2005. The evening sky had already darkened by the time the group of urban explorers reached the entrance to the abandoned tunnel beneath Pripyat. The only light came from their headlamps, casting long shadows across the derelict landscape. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of damp earth and rot, the unmistakable scent of decay that seemed to haunt every inch of the exclusion zone. Jack, the leader of the group, adjusted his backpack and checked his gear. He was in his late 30s, tall, with a strong, angular face. Years of exploring forgotten places had left him with a quiet, determined demeanor, and his sharp eyes betrayed an ever-present curiosity for the unknown. Despite the cold chill creeping in, Jack felt a fire inside him, the urge to uncover something lost to time, something that no one else had dared to discover. Beside him was Oliver, a technical expert in his early 30s with tousled brown hair and a laid-back attitude. He was the kind of guy who always had the right tool for the job, and his calm demeanor made him the perfect foil to Jack's intensity. Oliver wasn't as passionate about the ruins as Jack, but he had an uncanny ability to solve problems on the fly, which made him indispensable when things went wrong, and they often did in places like this. Then there was Sarah, a seasoned explorer in her mid-20s with a reputation for getting into and out of tight spots. Her sharp intuition made her the perfect scout. Sarah was a bit of an adrenaline junkie, but she was also meticulous in her planning, which balanced out the reckless tendencies of the others. Her eyes were always scanning their surroundings, alert to danger, even when it seemed safe. Finally, there was Max, the youngest member of the team at just 21. He was an enthusiastic photographer, always eager to capture every detail of the places they explored. Max had joined the group on several previous trips, and though he was inexperienced, his passion for the stories behind the ruins had earned him a place with the team. His youth was often an asset in navigating the tight spaces the others struggled with, but it also made him impulsive, a trait that sometimes led to trouble. "All right, everyone ready?" Jack asked, his voice breaking the silence. The others nodded, checking their gear one last time. They had been planning this expedition for weeks. Tonight, they would finally explore the abandoned tunnel beneath Pripyat, a place that had remained undisturbed for decades, and one that, according to local legends, few had dared to enter. The rumors surrounding the tunnel had drawn them in. Some said it led to secret Soviet bunkers hidden deep underground. Others claimed it was part of a forgotten metro system that had been sealed off after the disaster. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that no one who had gone in had ever come back. But the team wasn't afraid. Not yet. They began their descent into the tunnel, their footsteps muffled by the dirt and rubble. The walls of the passageway were damp and slick with condensation, and the air grew cooler as they moved deeper into the bowels of the earth. The faint hum of distant machinery, or perhaps something else, could be heard reverberating through the walls. "Did you hear that?" Oliver's voice was barely a whisper. He stopped in his tracks, his head tilting slightly as he strained to listen. At first, the sound was faint, almost like an electrical buzz, distant but growing louder. The others fell silent, eyes wide. "It's coming from deeper in," Sarah said, her voice tense. "We should check it out." Max, always the first to move, was already a few steps ahead of them. Jack followed quickly, signaling the others to stay close. They pressed on, the hum growing louder with every step. The air felt heavier now, almost oppressive, as if the tunnel itself was alive. It didn't take long before they reached the end of the passage, where a heavy metal door stood partially ajar. Jack pushed the door open with a groan, and they entered the next chamber. What they saw made them all stop in their tracks. An old train sat motionless in the center of the room, its once shiny metal now rusted and covered in layers of grime. The hum they had been hearing seemed to emanate from the train itself, vibrating through the air in a way that felt unnatural. Max let out a low whistle. "What is this? Why is it here?" Sarah stepped forward cautiously. "I've never seen anything like this before. It's like it was just abandoned." Oliver squinted, his flashlight dancing across the metal surface. "It doesn't make any sense. This thing looks like it's from the 1980s, but it's in far too good of a condition." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Stay sharp. There's something off about this place." They approached the train, but as they drew closer, the humming sound stopped. Silence descended on the room like a thick blanket. Max felt a chill run down his spine. That's weird. It was just buzzing. Then, the lights on the train flickered on, one by one. The train lights flickered once more before settling into a steady glow. It wasn't much, just a few dim bulbs overhead, casting long shadows on the rusted walls of the train. The hum was gone, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in from all sides. Jack held up his hand, signaling for the group to stop. His instincts were telling him something was wrong. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, but he wasn't about to let fear take hold. Not yet. "Stay close," he whispered, and the others, though clearly uneasy, nodded in agreement. They approached the train cautiously, their footsteps soft against the dusty floor. The air had grown colder, the temperature dropping rapidly as they neared the engine. It felt like they had crossed into a different world entirely. A place where time stood still, a place that shouldn't exist. Max, always eager to explore, was the first to step onto the train. He paused in the doorway, his flashlight sweeping across the interior. The train cars were unnervingly pristine for something that had been left abandoned for so long. The seats were still intact, their upholstery faded but not torn. There were no signs of the typical decay you would expect from a place untouched for decades. "Guys, you need to see this," Max called out. His voice was tense, but there was a mix of excitement and fear in it. The others followed him inside, their flashlights cutting through the dark. The car they entered was just like the others, empty, save for a few discarded papers and old, rusted machinery scattered along the walls. But it was the atmosphere that unsettled them most, the overwhelming sense that this place had not just been abandoned, but forgotten by time itself. "Look at this," Sarah said, kneeling down near a stack of papers. She picked one up, her brow furrowing as she scanned the text. "This is dated 1986, right after the disaster." "Let me see," Oliver said, stepping forward. He took the paper from her hand, scanning it quickly. "It looks like a logbook of some kind, but none of this makes sense. Why would a train like this be here? It doesn't match anything in the records I've found." Jack was quiet, his mind racing. There were too many questions, too many things that didn't add up. But what unsettled him more than anything was the feeling that they weren't supposed to be here. "Okay, we need to keep moving," Jack said finally, his voice firm but measured. "We don't know what's going on, but we can't just stand around." They made their way to the next car, which looked just as abandoned as the first. But there was something different about it. The air felt heavier here, thick with an oppressive stillness that made it hard to breathe. "Why is it so cold in here?" Max muttered, rubbing his arms. They moved toward the end of the car, but as they did, the sound of something, or someone, moving in the farthest corner of the train froze them in their tracks. The noise was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Everyone's gaze shot to the back of the car. The space was empty, save for a few old suitcases and the remnants of what might have once been a traveler's belongings. But the sound was there. Soft, deliberate footsteps. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Before anyone could answer, the hum returned, this time much louder, as though the train itself had come alive again. It seemed to pulse through the walls, rattling their bones. "Stay calm," Jack ordered, his voice steady despite the creeping dread rising in his chest. "We'll check the back of the train." They advanced slowly, their flashlights sweeping the dark corners of the car. Every step felt like they were trespassing in a place that should have been left alone. Max was the first to reach the back door, pulling it open with a loud creak. Nothing, just empty space beyond. But as Jack stepped forward, something caught his eye. A piece of paper fluttered on the floor, as though blown by some unseen wind. It was a strange thing to see in a place as sealed off as this. He bent down to pick it up. The paper was old, brittle, and yellowed with age. It was covered in handwritten text, but the words were scrambled, almost as if someone had tried to write something down in a hurry, only to stop midway. Jack held it up to the light, trying to make sense of the scrawled letters. "The train is not abandoned? It's waiting," he read aloud, his voice trailing off. Before he could finish, the train lights flickered again, and the floor beneath them seemed to shift, as though something deep inside the earth had stirred. The air turned cold. the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, freezing you from the inside out. Jack looked at the others, his heart pounding in his chest. We need to get out of here. But as they turned to leave, the train's doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound of the train doors slamming shut echoed through the narrow passageways, rattling the group. The air, once cold, was now unnervingly still, thick with an unsettling silence. Jack's pulse quickened, his breath coming out in shallow gasps. He reached for the door handle, pulling hard, but it wouldn't budge. The door was sealed tight, as if locked from the outside. "Try the other side," Jack muttered, already moving toward the far end of the car. His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking. Something wasn't right. The others scrambled to the other doors, pulling and pushing, trying to force them open. But no matter how hard they tried, the doors remained closed, as though the train had been locked in place by some unseen force. This is impossible," Oliver said, his voice tinged with panic. "We were just outside. We walked in like it was nothing, and now we can't even get out?" Sarah slammed her fist against the door, frustration mounting. "What the hell is going on here?" Jack turned toward the group, his face grim. "Stay calm. We'll figure this out. There's got to be another way." Max was already at the windows, banging on them with the heel of his hand. "The windows are sealed too. We're not getting out this way." They all stood there in the stifling silence, trying to make sense of the situation. The train felt like a living thing now, its walls closing in, the air growing colder with every passing moment. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the cabin. Then, just as Jack was about to suggest they explore the rest of the train, he heard a sound. A faint scrape. It came from the far end of the car. "Did you hear that?" Jack's voice was low, barely above a whisper. The others froze, eyes darting toward the sound. It was coming from behind the thick metal door that separated the train cars. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving in the darkness beyond. "Sarah," Jack said, his voice tight, "take a look through the vent in the door. See if you can make out anything." Sarah didn't hesitate. She moved to the door, crouching down to peer through a small ventilation grate. Her flashlight illuminated the space beyond. At first, it seemed like there was nothing there, just more darkness. But then something moved, a shadow darting across the dimly lit hallway. "I see something," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's moving. I think it's someone." Max stepped forward, a confused expression on his face. "What do you mean, someone? Are you sure?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were wide as she watched the shadow through the grate. "It's not normal. It's like it's shifting, like it's not human." Jack stepped closer to her. "What do you mean, not human?" Before she could respond, a loud clang echoed from the far end of the train. A jolt ran through the car, as though the train itself had shifted position. The lights flickered again, this time plunging them into total darkness for a brief moment. When they came back on, the train had changed. It wasn't the same as before. The layout was different. The cars had somehow shifted positions. The walls that had once been there, separating them from the next section, were gone. The train seemed to have stretched or twisted as if it were rearranging itself before their eyes. This isn't possible," Oliver said, his voice rising in disbelief. "There's no way we could have moved like this. We haven't gone anywhere." They all stood there in shock, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It was as if the train was playing tricks on them, shifting in ways that didn't belong in the real world. Max started to panic. "This is it. We're stuck here. We're stuck in some kind of ghost train." Jack reached for his radio, but there was no signal. It was as if the train was blocking any attempt to contact the outside world. "Calm down, Max," Jack said, his voice firm. "We're not stuck. We just need to figure out what's happening. We've seen strange things before, and we can get through this. But we need to stick together." But even as Jack spoke, doubt gnawed at him. Nothing about the situation made sense. The train shouldn't be alive. It shouldn't be changing. And the hum, it was still there, vibrating through the walls, making his teeth rattle in his skull. "We should move through the train," Sarah suggested, her voice steady despite her visible unease. "Maybe there's an explanation for all this." Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, we'll move to the front. Maybe there's an emergency stop or a control room of some kind." They began to walk through the shifting train, passing through car after car that seemed increasingly strange. The decor grew older, more Soviet in design, as though the train was pulling them further back in time. The air became thick with the smell of mold and rust, and the shadows seemed to grow longer with each step. Finally, they reached the front of the train, where the engine should have been. But instead of the familiar metal controls, there was only a small compartment with a single chair. The chair was empty, but the atmosphere in the room was palpable, like something had recently occupied it. Jack's stomach churned. Something was watching them. He could feel it. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A figure, standing at the far end of the car, cloaked in shadow. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching them. The figure at the end of the car remained motionless, its form blending with the shadows, so still it could have been part of the train itself. Jack's heart raced, and for a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the train vibrating through the walls, which now felt more like a low, persistent growl than a hum. Max was the first to break the silence. "What the hell is that?" Jack raised a hand, signaling for them to stay quiet. His mind raced. It was hard to make out any details in the dim light, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't part of the train. Whatever it was, it didn't belong here. "Stay calm," Jack said, though his own voice didn't sound as steady as he wanted it to. "We're not alone in here." Sarah's eyes narrowed, her hand gripping the flashlight tightly. "We need to get a better look. We can't just stand here." Max moved forward, his steps tentative at first, then growing more confident. But before anyone could stop him, the figure moved. In an instant, it glided across the car, its movements unnatural, fluid, like something that didn't follow the laws of physics. It was closer now, and Jack could make out the details. The figure was tall, draped in a tattered dark cloak that hung loosely over its frame. The face, if it could even be called that, was obscured. A blank void where eyes should have been, as though someone had erased all features, leaving nothing but shadow. "Holy shit," Max breathed, taking a step back. "That's not real." The air around them grew colder, the temperature dropping so suddenly that Jack could see his breath in the stale air. His body felt frozen in place, not just from the cold, but from something far more terrifying. It wasn't just that the figure was there. It was aware of them, and it was waiting. "Back," Jack said urgently. "We need to get back to the other car now." But as they turned, the figure moved again, this time faster, blocking their path. It was as if the train itself had bent to its will, and now the exits were shut off. Max backed away, panic rising in his chest. "We're trapped." Jack's mind raced. There had to be an answer. Some way out. He wasn't about to let this thing corner them. Not now. "Stay close," he ordered. "We're getting out of here." He grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the nearest car. But the moment they took a step forward, the train jolted violently. They stumbled, barely managing to keep their balance as the whole structure shuddered. The lights flickered again, plunging them into darkness for a brief moment before returning. And when they did, the figure was gone, completely vanished. Max's breath was coming in sharp, panicked gasps. "It's gone. But where did it go? What the hell was that?" Jack didn't answer right away. He was scanning the room, his pulse racing. But there was nothing. No sign of the figure, no movement, just the hollow emptiness of the train. "That doesn't make any sense," Sarah said, shaking her head. "It was right there, and now it's just gone." "We need to find a way out of here," Jack said firmly, his eyes never leaving the dark corners of the car. "That thing, whatever it was, it's not the only thing on this train. And we're running out of time." They moved quickly, making their way back toward the middle of the train. The whole place felt wrong now, like a twisted funhouse where nothing was as it seemed. Each car they entered felt different, subtly altered, as though the train itself was playing tricks on them, warping their perception. In one car, the walls were lined with old Soviet-era propaganda posters, but in another, the windows were covered with thick layers of frost, as though the temperature had dropped to below freezing in an instant. It wasn't just the train that was shifting. It felt as if the very fabric of reality was bending around them. "Do you guys feel that?" Max asked, his voice tight. "It's like the air is different, heavier." They all nodded, sensing the same oppressive weight pressing down on them. "We've got to find the engine," Jack said. There has to be a way to stop this train, or at least figure out what's controlling it. Oliver stepped forward. I agree, but where do we even start? The train's layout it's not right. The doors keep changing. The cars keep shifting. I don't know if we can even trust the path we're walking on anymore. Let's go to the front, Jack said, his voice resolute. Maybe the engine has some kind of manual override. We find that, and maybe we can control the train, or at least get a signal out. They made their way toward the front of the train again, the sense of dread growing with each step. As they moved through the next car, something caught Sarah's eye. A door they hadn't seen before. It was partially open, leading to a small compartment tucked away in the farthest corner of the train. Jack motioned for the others to follow, and they cautiously approached the door. The air inside the compartment was stifling, and the room was dimly lit, casting long, oppressive shadows. There was something on the floor. Max stepped forward, his flashlight illuminating the shape. It was a small, old radio, the kind you might find in a Soviet-era bunker, its dials rusted and worn. This is what we need, Oliver said, moving to examine it. Maybe it can help us contact the outside. But before he could touch the radio, the hum intensified again, and the floor beneath them trembled. The train was moving faster. Oliver crouched beside the old radio, his fingers gingerly brushing over the rusted dials. The hum of the train vibrated through the metal floor beneath them, growing louder with each passing second. It felt as though the entire structure was alive, its heart pulsing in rhythm with the strange sound that seemed to originate from deep within the train. I don't know if this will work, Oliver said, his voice low. This thing looks like it hasn't been used in years. Max leaned over his shoulder, his flashlight casting a harsh beam of light on the radio. What if we're just wasting time with this old thing? Maybe we should. Just give him a minute, Jack interrupted, his voice sharp. We're running out of options. If this thing can help us get in touch with the outside world, we need to try. Oliver nodded, turning the dial slowly, listening intently for any change in the static. The air felt thick, oppressive. It wasn't just the temperature that had dropped. There was something else, a heavy, unnatural stillness. Every sound was magnified. Every movement felt like it echoed through the entire train. Then, as if responding to his efforts, the radio emitted a sharp crackle. It wasn't much at first, just a brief burst of static, but then, through the noise, a voice began to emerge. Faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. Is anyone? Can you hear? This is. Oliver's hand froze on the dial, his breath catching in his throat. Did you hear that? He whispered. Jack leaned in closer, his heart pounding in his chest. Keep it on. The voice grew clearer, though still distorted, as though the speaker was speaking through a veil of static. It was hard to make out the words, but the message was unmistakable. Someone was trying to communicate. Lost. Cannot escape. Suddenly, the signal cut out, replaced by a harsh screech of static. Oliver twisted the dial frantically, trying to reconnect. No, come on, he muttered, his face tense with frustration. The static roared louder, drowning out any attempts to regain the signal. He slapped the side of the radio, but the only response was a low hum, as if the train itself were mocking them. Whatever that was, it wasn't good, Sarah said quietly, her voice filled with unease. It sounded like someone warning us. Max shivered. Escape? Escape from what? Jack straightened, his eyes scanning the room. He wasn't sure what to make of the message, but it confirmed something he'd already feared. They were not alone in this place, and whatever had been watching them, that figure, it was tied to the train, to whatever was happening here. We need to move, Jack said, his tone urgent. The signal was a warning, and I don't think it's safe to stay here much longer. But before anyone could respond, the train lurched again, this time more violently. The floor shook beneath their feet, sending them stumbling into the walls of the cramped compartment. The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging them into pitch darkness. The hum was louder now, vibrating the very air around them. It felt as though the train was accelerating, the sound growing more oppressive, more frantic. Jack could feel it in his chest, the heavy pulse of something ancient, something alive, pushing them forward, deeper into whatever nightmare this place had become. Get the lights back on, Max shouted, panic creeping into his voice. He fumbled for his flashlight, but the beam only revealed the thick blackness surrounding them. "We need to find the control room," Jack said, his voice barely audible over the low growl of the train. "Now." They stumbled out of the compartment, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was thick, colder than before, and every step felt as though they were being pulled deeper into the heart of the train. The layout was shifting again. The walls seemed to be changing, the doors no longer where they had been. Max was the first to notice. "Wait, look! The door's gone." It was right there. Sure enough, the door they had just passed through was now completely absent. In its place was nothing but the same rusted metal walls, as though the space had been sealed shut, erased from existence. "This place is changing," Sarah muttered. "Like it's alive." The group pressed on, more cautious now, their movements slow and deliberate. The train's rhythm had become erratic, each jolt stronger than the last. It felt as if the entire structure was being pulled into something otherworldly. They turned a corner and found themselves standing at the edge of a large open space. The floor here was slick with a strange, viscous substance that glistened in the light. It spread out across the floor like some kind of strange black oil, glimmering and shifting, as though it had a life of its own. "What the hell is that?" Max asked, his voice trembling. "Whatever it is," Jack said, his eyes narrowing, "it's not natural." Oliver knelt down, his fingers brushing the liquid. His face went pale as he recoiled. "It's warm." Suddenly, they heard it, a low, guttural growl. It wasn't from any animal. It was from somewhere deep inside the train, a sound so visceral it felt like it was coming from the very core of the earth. The floor trembled again, this time more violently, and the lights flickered once more. But this time, they didn't come back on. The darkness was complete, and then the doors slammed shut. They were trapped. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the train's low, growling hum intensified, vibrating through their bones. The air felt heavy, pressing against them from all sides. Every breath seemed more difficult to take, as if the atmosphere itself were alive, squeezing the life out of them. "Okay, that's it," Max said, panic edging his voice. "We need to get out of here, now." He tugged at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The metal was cold and unyielding beneath his fingers. Jack moved to join him, his hands pulling at the door with increasing desperation, but it was no use. Whatever force had locked them in was far stronger than they were. "We need to stay calm," Jack said, his voice as steady as he could manage. "Panicking won't help. We'll find a way out. We just have to keep moving." But as he spoke, he could feel it too. The growing sense of dread, the certainty that something was watching them, waiting for them to make the wrong move. The growl echoed again, louder this time. It wasn't a sound made by any creature they had ever encountered, more like the rumble of a storm breaking in the distance, something deep and primal. And it was getting closer. "Did anyone else hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Before anyone could respond, a loud scraping sound came from the direction they had just come from. It was slow, deliberate, like claws dragging against metal. Max's flashlight darted toward the noise, but the beam illuminated only the empty, shifting hallways of the train. "Let's go," Jack said urgently. "We don't have time to stand around." They ran down the corridor, the train lurching beneath their feet as if it were being pulled by some unseen force. The walls seemed to warp and stretch around them, the flickering lights casting strange, distorted shadows that twisted in unnatural ways. Every door they passed was either sealed shut or disappeared entirely, as though the train was eating them whole, one compartment at a time. The deeper they went, the more they felt like they were losing their bearings. The layout had become a maze, familiar hallways looping back into themselves, spaces that had once been linear, now twisted in impossible angles. It was as though the very nature of the train was warping reality. "Where the hell are we?" Max asked, his voice shaking. "We're still on the same train," Jack answered, though his own voice was tight. "But something's changing it, bending it, making it not real." They turned another corner, and the growl came again, louder now, vibrating through the very walls. It felt like it was just around the next turn. Without warning, the lights flickered and died again. Total darkness. "Everyone, stay close!" Jack called out, his voice steady but commanding. "We're not splitting up. Keep your flashlights on, and don't let them flicker." The darkness felt oppressive, like it was closing in on them. They moved cautiously, their footsteps barely making a sound as they stepped through the silent train. The train's unnatural hum was the only thing they could hear now, louder and more menacing than before. Then, just as they were rounding another corner, a loud crash erupted from behind them, the sound of metal being ripped apart. They spun around, their flashlights frantically sweeping the darkened corridor, but there was nothing there, except the growl. It came from ahead of them now. A shadow moved at the end of the hallway. Tall, human-shaped, but it wasn't human. It was too tall, too distorted, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Its silhouette was blurry, shifting in and out of focus, like it wasn't truly there at all. I don't think that's real, Oliver said, his voice barely above a whisper. He sounded more terrified than Jack had ever heard him. We don't have time to think, Jack said, grabbing Sarah's arm. Run! They bolted down the hallway, the growl now a deafening roar, shaking the train's foundations. Jack could feel the vibrations beneath his feet, the hum of the train vibrating so intensely it was like the walls were trembling with fear. But the shadow was gaining on them. No matter how fast they ran, it seemed to move just as quickly, its long limbs stretching unnaturally, closing the distance between them. Faster! Jack shouted. We have to get to the front of the train. Now! They ran toward the next car, but the door, which had been opened just moments ago, was now completely gone, replaced by a solid wall of metal. Shit! Max cursed, pounding his fist against the wall. We're running out of time! Jack frantically looked around. The train was changing faster now, warping, shifting, like it was alive, responding to their fear. Every door, every window was gone. The space around them seemed to stretch, bending in on itself. It was as if the walls themselves had turned into a maze, trapping them in an endless loop. The shadow was closer now, the air thickening with an overwhelming sense of dread. It was so close Jack could feel its presence, a chill creeping down his spine. I don't think we're going to make it out, Sarah said, her voice trembling. We are going to make it out, Jack snapped. We just need to find the control room. They ran down the hallway, only to see another figure ahead. This one humanoid, but its face was obscured by a thick layer of soot, its body covered in tattered rags. It stood completely still, blocking the way forward. The growl came again, louder, as if the train was trying to warn them or perhaps to drive them mad. Jack's mind raced. They had to find the source of this madness, the heart of whatever was controlling the train. If they didn't, they would be lost here forever, trapped in the shifting nightmare. And then, just as all hope seemed lost, the train jolted violently, throwing them all to the floor. The doors behind them slammed open with a deafening bang. Go, go! Jack yelled. They scrambled to their feet and bolted through the open doors, plunging into the next car. But as they entered, they were met with something far worse. The train's control room. And it was empty. The end of part 1.